Hey there, and welcome back to the channel. So one of my favorite blocks that I built for the Crosswinds Blocks plugin is the grid block. Now I know that there's now a core grid block in WordPress, but to be honest, I like this block. It allows users to do a whole lot more and give them more control over how their grids look than the WordPress one does, at least at the moment. With this block, users can create simple grids or they can create more complex layouts with their grids and do really cool things. Plus, they can control how the grid looks at desktop, tablet, and mobile screen sizes. So in today's video, I'm just going to walk through how I was able to build this block to help you learn more about how to do WordPress block development in this modern WordPress age. Before we get started, if you want to see more videos about WordPress development, web design, any of those sorts of things, be sure to hit the subscribe button and ring the bell for notifications. Now, let's get started. Okay, so let's dive in to how I was able to build this grid block. And really, this is actually two blocks. We have the parent basic grid block, which you can see right here, and then we also have the basic grid item, which is a child block that's only available inside the basic grid block, essentially. So let's first talk about the parent basic grid block. It's a pretty standard block. Come in here. We have attributes for the number of desktop columns, number of tablet columns, and number of mobile columns. We also have grid gap, whether or not it's going to be the same grid gap for columns and rows, and then the row gap and column gap right here. And then we'll define some of the styling a little bit later. And then right here, if the grid, if it's not going to be the same gap between row and column, then we display the individual one controls here. It's a basic range control component. Pretty simple here. And then we adjust sort of our grid style. And then if they're going to be the same, then we just have our one range control for both. And we set the styling down here. And this will all get dumped into the inspector controls right here under the grid spacing panel, which you'll see here in a second when we take a look at the block itself. And then we have our different number of columns for each screen size. So essentially, I used Foundation a lot when I was really first learning web development, and they use sort of like the 12 count grid, which I believe is similar to what Bootstrap does. And that's basically what I've emulated here. You can pick a number between 1 and 12 for the number of columns for each screen size. Initially this is set to 3 for desktop. It's 2 for tablet, and then 1 for mobile columns. But a user can come in here and change it to whatever they want it to be. It's pretty basic, pretty simple. And essentially what this does is it sets, we use this to set a class. So we come up here, and essentially we're adding a class for the number of columns for each screen size. It's easier that way than trying to do it inline styling, because there are different screen sizes involved, and trying to do that through inline styling is near next to impossible. So essentially, I just took it upon myself to, we come in here, we have different styling for each potential option for each of the 12 options for each screen size, basically. It's a little bit of harder work technically because it's more CSS I'm having to write, but it makes it a whole lot easier to manage the different screen sizes. And as you can tell here, sort of the breakpoint between mobile and tablet is 250 or 650. And then the difference between tablet and desktop is 1,000 pixels. Simple as that. And really, for the most part, for the basic grid, the parent block, this is it. Pretty simple. Where it gets a little bit tricky here is when we start talking about the basic grid item. And so I just have sort of set up the inner blocks props so that really the only directly allowed block as a direct child to the basic grid block is the basic grid item block. Otherwise, things won't work very well. And so we have it here. And just again, now this is different from a lot of the other blocks that I built. Those are generally dynamic blocks with the template.php file. This one has an actual save.js file, keeping it all in the JavaScript because it's really doesn't need to be a dynamic block, really. But I mean, in here we're just getting all the attributes. We're setting up the grid styling for the inline styling. We're adding the classes based off of number of desktop, tablet, and mobile columns, and we're on our way. So really that's the basic grid block in a nutshell. Now let's dive into the fun one, which is the basic grid item. So as you can tell from looking at it, there are a lot more options with the basic grid item block. And that really helps a user have more control over how their grid looks. We're looking at column span, row spans for the different screen sizes. We have some sort of layout options here. We're using display flex. So is it normal spacing? Is it equal spacing throughout the height of the grid item? Are we center aligning? Are we aligning everything to the bottom? Or are we putting like the last item like a button at the bottom? So that's really all we're kind of doing up here. We have a select control for that. And this is, the grid item, or really this sort of spacing thing is something that's always visible because it's something that might be used a little bit more. And then sort of our column and row spans, we're throwing into this advanced grid item setting, which actually is closed just because people might not need to use it very much. So let's not necessarily throw it right at them in that sort of inspector controls panel on the right side. The biggest thing for me with especially the column spans was making sure someone didn't go over the max number of desktop columns that they had set in the parent block. That was quite interesting. Actually, and something I did for that, as I'm going through building the basic grid item, like, oh shoot, I need to come back here. And I'm passing the number of desktop, tablet, and mobile columns down to the basic grid item block through context. This provides context. And then we are able to pick it up through getting context through the props. That's a big help if you need to send data or anything from a parent block to a child block. You see this a lot with the query blocks and the post template blocks, passing data down to like the post title block, featured image block, those sorts of things. So if you're really wanting to do complex things like that and you need to pass data from a parent block to a child block, really you should look into context with block development, because it's powerful, but it does take a little bit to learn. But we're getting those number of columns through the context, and then through the range control, able to set those. We're down here is like the max number of columns for desktop, for tablet, and mobile. Screen sizes, and then for rows, it's just 100, just because I don't think anybody's going to go over 100. Really shouldn't go over like 5, otherwise you're going to have a really weird looking grid. But if you want to, the more power to you, as far as I can tell. You might break something, but you're kind of on your own at that point. So that's sort of all the range controls we have here. And then again, I'm doing this again through class names, just because it's so much easier to deal with at different screen sizes through classes and actual CSS rather than inline styling. So we set those here. And again, we're going to have inner blocks because we need things to put inside of our grid item, and we really want it to be anything at that point. Images, text. If you want to use the single content block inside of a grid item, more power to you. So you set our inner blocks here. We set up a template first we want a sort of a group block that's around everything inside of the grid item. So we just set that up here with some, we do want to sort of use flex box. I think we want to make sure it sort of fills its height, but we had like the normal inner layout. So we set those attributes with our group block, and then we just essentially return it. Just similar to what we did with the parent basic grid block. And then save, it's basically the same thing. Just get our attributes, set our classes, and then we display the inner blocks that the user puts into any of the grid items. And then styling, again, it's the same. We're spanning as many columns and as many rows as somebody wants. I do have it set up for 12. I should probably change the upper limit. In the next update, I'll fix that. But we have our our row, column, and row, or our mobile row and column spans. Same for tablet, and then same for desktop screen sizes. And so that's really how that was built. And for me, for building this block, it was more of taking the time to think about how this would work, and realizing that I was going to need a parent and a child block. But once it got down to actually creating the block, it was a lot easier than I thought it was going to be, which tends to happen sort of with block development. Sometimes it can feel like this big, scary thing. But once you start building with blocks and getting used to how React works, sometimes you just got to take that plunge. But like once you sort of get used to it, a lot of things that might seem really complicated are actually pretty easy. So now I just wanted to take a quick look to see how this block works in the wild, sort of. So here I have a photo grid that I've already built. I'm using the Crosswinds Framework on this development site too, which has a CSS class that essentially sort of photo grid CSS class, which makes it so that when you have photos like this, all the photos sort of stretch to be the same height as the tallest one on that row, similar to what WordPress core does with the gallery block. Just makes the photo grid look a lot nicer. All the images might not look great, but visually, at least, we have all of our similar column and row widths, at least. So this is basically just a simple grid. This is a simple setup. We have 4 desktop columns, 2 tablet, 1 mobile. You can come over here. We can see it in action, and we'll shrink it down. You can see it shrinks like so. And then if we want to get a little bit more advanced, let's say we want this one to span 2 columns, 2 rows, and like so. And then let's see, what else could we do? Well, this one could span 2 rows like that. But I mean, you can come in and play with this block and see what works, what's really cool with it, what might not work, any of that. Just curious. But it just gives you so many different options, and again, you control how this looks at different screen sizes, which is one of the drawbacks with a lot of the WordPress core blocks right now, is that there's not a whole lot of control for responsiveness. So that was something I really wanted to focus on when building this block, and I feel like it's done that pretty well. So if you're watching this and you're looking for a grid block, that gives you a whole lot of control, this is something that you can use on your website. And if you're just looking to learn more about WordPress block development, be sure to check out the GitLab repo for Crosswinds Blocks. I'll link it down in the description below. You can check it out. You can see how I built all the other blocks with all the code, and It is open source, so feel free if you need to create a block for a client website or your personal website or something, you can feel free to sort of just use that code as a starting point for your custom block development. So that's the grid block in a nutshell. What questions do you have about how I built it or how it works or anything like that? Or have you used the Crosswinds Blocks plugin and used this block specifically, and how did you like it? And if you want to try out the grid block here or any of the other blocks in the Crosswinds Blocks plugin, you can learn more about the plugin down in the description below. And if you want to learn more about web development, WordPress development, web design, anything like that, be sure to hit the subscribe button and the ring the bell for notifications. But that is it for today. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.